Britain's in a really bad, Britain is broken, that Britain's in a really bad state. The country's going down the tubes, and we need fresh leadership and a different attitude.
So the worst case scenario, economically, is better than where we are today and gives us the chance to start thinking globally and, by the way, bringing prices down for...
Starmer exposed. Nigel Farage exposes Starmer's contracts for importation of illegal migrants and drugs. In a revelation that has sent shockwaves through British politics, Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing intense scrutiny over his involvement. In a 2020 letter that successfully blocked the deportation of convicted child rapist Fabian Henry. The letter, which was signed by Starmer and several other Labour MPs, has ignited a firestorm of criticism, with opponents accusing him of prioritizing political correctness over public safety. Fabian Henry, a Jamaican national, was convicted of multiple serious sexual offenses, including the rape of a 17-year-old girl and the abduction and sexual assault of a 15-year-old. Despite serving his sentence, Henry was slated for deportation under the government's efforts to remove foreign criminals from the UK. However, the deportation was halted following the intervention of a group of Labour MPs, including Starmer, who argued that the removal would be unjust. Critics argue that this intervention allowed a dangerous individual to remain in the country, potentially putting more lives at risk. By signing that letter, Starmer effectively ensured that a convicted rapist stayed in the UK, said a spokesperson for the Conservative Party. This raises serious questions about his judgment and priorities. The backlash has been swift and unforgiving. Conservative MPs have seized upon the issue, calling for Starmer to apologize and clarify his stance on deporting foreign criminals. This is a matter of public safety, said Home Secretary Suella Braverman. If Starmer cannot support the removal of dangerous individuals from our streets, how can the public trust him to keep them safe? Labour insiders, however, defend Starmer's actions, arguing that the letter was part of a broader effort to address the injustices of the Windrush scandal, where individuals who had the right to remain in the UK were wrongfully detained and deported. Keir's involvement in the letter was about ensuring that the government learned from past mistakes and didn't repeat them, said a senior Labour source. The public's response has been mixed. A recent poll indicated that a majority of respondents believe that foreign criminals should be deported after serving their sentences. It's common sense, said one respondent. Why should we keep dangerous people in the country when they have no right to be here? However, others express concern about the potential for miscarriages of justice. We need to be careful, said another. If we start deporting people without proper consideration, we risk repeating the mistakes of the past. The legal implications of the 2020 letter are complex. While MPs have the right to petition the government on behalf of their constituents, intervening in individual deportation cases is unusual. Legal experts suggest that such actions could set a concerning precedent, potentially undermining the deportation process. Ethically, the situation raises questions about the balance between justice for victims and the rights of individuals facing deportation. It's a delicate issue, said Dr. Emily Thompson, a criminologist. On one hand, we must protect the public from dangerous individuals. On the other, we must ensure that our actions are fair and just. As the controversy continues to unfold, Starmer faces increasing pressure to address the issue head-on. Calls for transparency and accountability are growing louder, with many demanding a full explanation of his involvement in the letter and his current stance on deporting foreign criminals. In the coming weeks, Starmer is expected to make a public statement, clarifying his position. Until then, the debate over the balance between justice, public safety, and individual rights remains a hot topic in British politics. The revelation that Keir Starmer signed a letter to block the deportation of a convicted child rapist has cast a long shadow over his leadership. As the public and political scrutiny intensifies, Starmer's handling of this issue could have significant implications for his political future and the broader discourse on immigration and justice in the UK. Keir Starmer's political credibility is now under intense scrutiny following the revelation that he signed a letter which contributed to blocking the deportation of Fabian Henry, a convicted child rapist. The letter, co-signed by other Labour MPs in 2020, urged the Home Office to halt a planned deportation flight which included individuals like Henry. At the time, the signatories framed their opposition around broader concerns with the Home Office's deportation practices, particularly in the context of the Windrush scandal and human rights issues. However, the resurfacing of this letter and the criminal records of some individuals who were spared deportation have led to public outrage. Fabian Henry was convicted of serious offenses including rape and sexual assault of minors. The fact that he remained in the UK after his prison sentence, due to political intervention, has ignited a national debate not only about immigration and deportation policies, but about the moral and political judgments of those in power. Most notably, Starmer. Opposition parties and commentators have accused Starmer of placing political ideals above public safety. The anger is not confined to the usual political arenas. It has spilled over into public forums, social media, and community discussions, with many citizens asking how a party leader could sign off on protecting a known sexual predator from being removed from the country. For victims and their families, it is an especially painful reminder that the justice system and political leadership can sometimes appear to favor perpetrators over protection of the public. Conservatives were quick to seize on the opportunity. Ministers and backbenchers lined up to criticize what they described as Labour's soft stance on crime and national security. The Justice Secretary was pressed repeatedly in the House of Commons, while Starmer and his party were accused of undermining the criminal justice system. The Prime Minister, who also reportedly signed the same letter during his time in opposition, has so far remained publicly silent, but internal divisions have begun to show public confidence in Labour's position on law and order may now be at risk. Polls conducted in the days after the news broke suggest a dip in support among voters who previously considered Labour to be reclaiming its footing as a viable party of government. Many are now asking whether the party under Starmer truly understands the scale of public concern about violent crime, immigration control, and justice for victims. Labour's defense, so far, has focused on the context in which the letter was written. The Windrush scandal, which exposed the wrongful detention and deportation of legal residents from the Caribbean, created widespread outrage and forced the government to reconsider its approach to immigration enforcement. In that environment, Labour MPs argued that the deportation flight in question risked repeating similar injustices. However, critics argue that this reasoning does not stand up when applied to convicted rapists and violent offenders. There is growing concern that the letter may have been signed without full knowledge of who was on the flight, although that too raises questions about diligence and accountability. Signing a letter with such significant consequences without fully understanding the implications points to either political recklessness or a dangerous disregard for the victims of the criminals involved. In Parliament, this controversy has become a flashpoint. During a heated debate, one MP remarked that the government seems more focused on managing headlines than protecting the public. Yet, others argued that it was Labour who failed in this regard by protecting individuals who had clearly forfeited their right to remain in Britain by committing serious crimes. The victims of Fabian Henry's crimes and advocacy groups supporting survivors of sexual violence have voiced their frustration. Some have issued public statements expressing disbelief that political leaders could have intervened in a way that allowed a predator to avoid deportation. One survivors' rights campaigner noted that these kinds of political decisions deepen the trauma of victims who often already feel the system is stacked against them. As pressure mounts, Keir Starmer has remained largely silent on the specific details of the letter and his reasons for signing it. That silence is being interpreted by some as political evasion. Former allies have urged him to clarify his position, apologize where necessary, and reaffirm Labour's commitment to prioritizing victims and public safety over political messaging. Others within his party are defending the decision, arguing that the principle of resisting blanket deportations, particularly those perceived to target black and minority ethnic individuals disproportionately, was morally sound at the time. What's becoming clear is that this incident won't disappear quickly. It strikes at the heart of a national debate over crime, punishment, immigration, and the role of politicians in the justice system. For Starmer, it poses a direct threat to the image he has tried to cultivate as a responsible, serious leader who puts country above party. The very same qualities he has promoted as antidotes to the perceived chaos of previous administrations are now under question. In the coming weeks, this controversy is expected to dominate headlines and parliamentary exchanges. The Home Office has been asked to clarify the current immigration status of Fabian Henry and other individuals protected by the letter. Campaigners are demanding a full list of signatories, the decision-making process behind the letter, and a re-examination of deportation policy. Keir Starmer's leadership is now being tested. In the court of public opinion, the damage to Starmer may already be done. Viral clips, sensational headlines, and talk radio debates are shaping perception faster than any press release or policy document. What people see is a Labour leader associated with protecting a child rapist. The nuance of immigration law, precedent, or human rights becomes secondary to that visceral image. To recover, Starmer must make a decisive move. That might mean releasing a full statement explaining his decision, expressing regret, or even proposing reforms to ensure political interventions in deportation cases are subject to stricter oversight. He could reaffirm his party's commitment to victim-led justice, clarify a zero-tolerance stance on sexual violence, and offer legislative proposals that prioritize community safety. This is no longer just a scandal. It's a test of leadership. How Starmer responds will not only shape his own credibility, but also define Labour's moral identity. Is it a party that listens to victims or lectures them? Is it focused on systemic justice or political optics? If Starmer fails to grasp the gravity of the situation, he may find that his silence becomes complicity in the eyes of many voters. And once the perception sets in, no amount of policy reform or rhetorical finesse will undo the damage. The story of Fabian Henry will fade, as all headlines do. But the questions it raises about power, responsibility, and the line between compassion and negligence will linger. Keir Starmer must now decide what side of that line he wants to be on. If Keir Starmer continues to allow this controversy to fester without confronting it decisively, he risks more than just a drop in opinion polls. He risks confirming the very suspicions many critics already harbor, that he is unwilling to make the hard moral choices when those choices might be politically uncomfortable. Inaction or vague platitudes will not cut it in the current political climate. Voters, particularly those in battleground constituencies, are watching closely. They want clarity. They want leadership. And above all, they want to know their safety is not being sacrificed for political expediency. Among Starmer's most vocal critics are survivors of sexual abuse and the organizations that represent them. They have issued statements calling for accountability and answers. For these groups, the decision to sign a letter that contributed to blocking the deportation of a known predator is more than just an error in judgment. It is a betrayal. It sends a chilling message to victims of sexual violence. that even the most egregious crimes can be overshadowed by political concerns. For survivors already disillusioned with the justice system, this only deepens their alienation. There is also growing unease among Labour voters who supported Starmer as a moderate alternative to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Many believed Starmer's background as a former public prosecutor would make him tough on crime and law and order focused. But now the optics are muddled. How can a former head of the Crown Prosecution Service justify helping keep a convicted rapist in the country? For these voters, it calls into question the very foundation of Starmer's political persona. In conservative quarters, the controversy has been a gift. Tory MPs and strategists are using it to draw a clear contrast between themselves and Labour, positioning their party as the only one truly committed to protecting the public. The Home Secretary in interviews has described Labour's actions as morally indefensible and has accused Starmer of enabling dangerous criminals to remain in Britain. One senior Conservative minister said bluntly, "We deport criminals. They protect them. The framing is simple, brutal, and effective. And unless Labour finds a counter-narrative that resonates with equal force, it will stick." Starmer's political allies are reportedly urging him to confront the issue directly. Some believe that a strong public statement acknowledging that the letter was a mistake, given what we now know about Henry, could turn the tide. Others argue that Starmer should pivot to proposing stronger laws around automatic deportation for serious crimes, sending a message that his party has learned from this and will act decisively in the future. Yet Starmer seems caught in a political no man's land, hesitant to abandon the moral high ground his supporters expect, but also aware of how damaging the current silence has become. His instinct for caution, honed during his legal career, may now be his greatest liability. There is also the question of how many other such cases exist. Was Fabian Henry an isolated case, or were there others on that flight with similarly dangerous histories? What was known by those who signed the letter? Did they request or receive a list of names and convictions? Or did they sign in principle, without details? These are not just political questions, they are ethical ones. And they go to the heart of whether MPs understand the real-world consequences of their advocacy. As investigations continue, it is likely more information will come to light. Journalists are already probing who else was on the blocked flight, what offenses were involved, and how many signatories were fully aware of the implications. Any further revelations of serious offenses could deepen the damage and bring more MPs into the political crossfire. Labour's communications team now faces a formidable challenge. Do they continue trying to move past the story, hoping public interest wanes? Or do they address it head-on, take responsibility, and try to reset the narrative? The stakes couldn't be higher. This controversy isn't just about Fabian Henry. It's about whether voters believe Labour can be trusted to govern, to make tough calls in the interest of public safety, not political convenience. For the victims, the answer is already clear. For them, there's no gray area. A man who violated children was allowed to remain in the country because a group of politicians, including the leader of the opposition, put their names to a letter. That fact, stripped of political context, is damning. Starmer's dilemma is that he cannot undo the past, but he can define his response. If he steps forward with honesty, if he acknowledges the pain caused, and if he proposes concrete reforms to prevent it from happening again, he might still command respect, not just from his party, but from the public. But every day of silence, every attempt to sidestep the issue, sends the opposite message: that victims come second, that leadership can be avoided, and that justice can be deferred. In the long run, that may do more to damage Labour than any Tory attack ad or media storm. Keir Starmer must now decide whether to confront the consequences of his decision or let it define him. The country is watching. As public awareness of the Fabian Henry deportation controversy continues to grow, so too does the pressure on Keir Starmer. Political opponents are not just criticizing his past decision, they're weaponizing it.